Commissioned by the USSR Television and Radio Broadcasting Committee. The spring of 1943, after the great battle of Stalingrad. That was a turning point in the Soviet people's heroic struggle against Nazism. But no second front was yet opened in Europe. 3/4 of the Third Reich's armed forces were fighting on the Soviet-German front. Despite the rigorous wartime conditions, the Soviet economy was steadily building up its potential. Bread for the front, everything for the front, everything for victory. This call of the Communist Party was the main meaning of life for every Soviet citizen. The Soviet soldier had yet to cover a long and difficult road on his way towards the homeland's borders. Liberation of the motherland. The spring of 1944 began with a lull in the fighting unprecedented throughout the whole war. Death itself seemed tired of reaping its harvest. Both sides were preparing for decisive summer battles. After the defeat in the Battle of Stalingrad, a disease previously unknown in medicine swept Hitlerite Germany. Classified Nazi papers described it as mental flu. Defeatism is the last stage before utter moral degradation. The once fashionable word blitz was replaced with the term total. After a total mobilization, the Wehrmacht generals were preparing to remove the stigma of Stalingrad from the army. An offensive was to be mounted in the area of the cities of Oryol, Kursk, and Belgorod, the so-called Battle of the Kursk Bulge. The Führer's General Headquarters, April 15, 1943. Top secret. Operations Order Number 6. I have decided that as soon as weather conditions permit, offensive Operation Citadel be launched. It must end in speedy and decisive success. Victory at Kursk must become a torch for the entire world. The General Staff had prepared for the Battle of Kursk more carefully than for any other operation ever. As many as 50 cracked Wehrmacht divisions and new weapons had been detailed for combat in Operation Citadel. Hitler's order was, there must be no setback. And yet it was already the Soviet Supreme Command that planned the course of the war. Its decision was to wear down the attacking enemy, stall him on the defense lines, and then launch a counteroffensive. The main role in these operations was assigned to the Voronezh Front and the Central Front. It was vitally important to find out the D-Day of the Germans. Soviet intelligence established it with a high degree of precision. Operation Citadel was to be started at 5:30 in the morning of July 5th. But Hitler's generals were in for a shock. Two hours before the start of the offensive, the German positions came under intense artillery fire. That took the Nazis by surprise. The start of their attack was delayed. Besides, they knew their intentions had been uncovered. Psychologically, the Hitlerites lost the battle already in its first hours. Just as at Stalingrad, the Soviet troops displayed mass heroism and selflessness in the Battle of the Kursk Bulge. In a letter home, Junior Lieutenant Derivanko, commander of an anti-tank gun platoon, wrote, "Mother, fighting will break out soon. You are afraid you may lose me. But am I going to die? No. One does not think of death at the age of 22. Yet the enemy is vicious and war is cruel. Bullets do not choose their goals. I may lay down my life, but you should know, Mother, if I am destined to die, I will die the death of a hero." On the very first day of fighting, Derivanko, a member of the Komsomol, destroyed 4 Tiger tanks. He was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Lieutenant Gorovets performed an unparalleled heroic deed in the fierce dogfight. He was the world's only pilot to have downed 9 enemy aircraft in one air combat. Lieutenant Gorovets was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. July 12th, a hilly field near the previously little-known Prokhorovka station. It was the scene of the biggest tank battle of the war. Up to 1,200 tanks took part in the battle on both sides. Eyewitnesses say the earth was trembling with the clanging of tracks and the thunder of guns. The smell of hot metal spread for many kilometers around. Fierce outbreak of fighting, columns of smoke were rising over the scorched black steppe. In a matter of hours, hundreds of fascist tanks were reduced to heaps of metal. The Battle of the Kursk Bulge not only exploited the success of Stalingrad, it was a turning point in the Second World War, and for Hitlerite Germany was the beginning of an ultimate catastrophe. The first artillery salute fired in Moscow was for the liberation of Oryol and Belgorod. But the Hitlerites still ruled Europe. Under the impact of the Soviet Army's victories, the fascist bloc began to show signs of strain. The liberation movement in occupied countries was mounting. Hitler's allies were trying to withdraw from the war. On September 8, 1943, Italy surrendered. The Soviet troops were marching to the west. Everyone knew that there was no time to be lost. Millions of people were languishing in Nazi slavery. The world slowly began learning the truth as the invaders were being driven from occupied lands. At the start of the war against the Soviet Union, Hitler said, "The basic essential here is learning how to handle the huge breadbasket so that we, first, could seize it, second, manage it, and third, exploit it." Goering made it quite plain, "I intend to plunder and do it effectively." That was also part of the Ost plan, to stifle the population of the occupied areas by plunder. Trainloads of slave labor were sent one after another to Germany. At that time, commissions were being set up to investigate fascist crimes. Materials were collected for the future Nuremberg trial. These 80 people were the only survivors out of the tens of thousands of inmates of the Klog death camp near Tallinn. During the occupation of Belarusia, the Nazis exterminated 2.5 million people. More than 4 million were exterminated in the Ukraine. After the war, some Western military historians wrote about the humanism of the German army, the chivalrous treatment of the civilians by German soldiers. Another film document. The SS chief Himmler is captiously inspecting the facilities in his charge. There had to be no faults in the Nazi model of the world. Whether other peoples live or die interests me only inasmuch as they are needed as slaves for the German culture. But the Soviet people did not become slaves of the occupiers. The vow of a guerrilla. I, a citizen of the great Soviet Union, a true son of the heroic Russian people, swear that I will bear arms until the last fascist scum on our earth is destroyed. Blood for blood, death for death.
Кровь за кровь, смерть за смерть.
Leo Tolstoy described guerrilla warfare as a cudgel of popular war. For centuries, this cudgel ruthlessly shattered all aggressors invading the Russian land. But the guerrilla movement had never before been so massive as in the war against fascism. Guerrilla warfare was gaining momentum the longer the aggressor stayed on Soviet soil. Over the year of 1943 alone, the number of guerrillas doubled to reach 250,000. The front line divided, but never disunited Soviet people. They were fighting a common struggle for common aims. Large territories were liberated in the enemy rear. Soviet power was restored even before the army arrived. Legendary commanders of guerrilla detachments, Kovpak, Rudnev, Fyodorov, Saburov, Vershigora. We have mentioned only a few. The popular guerrilla movement was a great help in the fight against Nazism. However, the destiny of the war was decided on the front. A year before the Hitlerites were stopped on the banks of the Volga River, Now they were trying to stop the Soviet army at the Dnieper. Hitler told one of the meetings, the Dnieper will sooner flow back than the Russians will get across it. The Soviet troops made an assault crossing of the Dnieper simultaneously on many sectors of the front. The way to the right bank Ukraine was now open. Even those who were born and grew up in Kiev could hardly recognize the city. The streets were deserted. Only 180,000 out of a population of 1 million remained in Kiev by the time of its liberation. Wartime children. Their lot in those years is a stern indictment against fascism. They were picked up on the roads of war, warmed and saved from starvation. But even long afterwards, their nightmares continued. Darkness and flames, the roar of aircraft, and soldiers in the Nazi uniform. Many of them woke up orphaned. Retreating, the Hitlerites left scorched earth behind them. Himmler's order of September 7, 1943 stipulated, in the retreat, not a single person, not a single head of cattle, not a single centner of grain, not a single rail, not a single unpoisoned well shall be left behind. The enemy shall find utterly scorched and devastated land. Active combat continued till the winter of 1943 and 44. After the completion of the Korsun-Shevchenko operation, the road to the southern Bug and Dniester rivers lay open to the advancing army. The Soviet army accumulated vast experience and combat skills. The art of its generals grew immeasurably. The army changed beyond recognition as compared with the first months of the war. Under the extremely difficult conditions of the mud-locked roads in spring, overcoming enemy resistance, the Soviet troops liberated the right bank Ukraine and rushed into the Crimea. But let's go back a little. It took the Hitlerites 250 days in 1941 and 42 to capture Sevastopol. In the summer of 1944, it took the troops of General Tolbuchin only 35 days to wipe out a 200,000-strong fascist army at Sevastopol. May 9th, 1944, exactly 1 year left to the end of the war. A new operation was mounted against a powerful group of Nazi armies center on the Belarusian front. The German command named the defense line in Belarusia Vaterland, the fatherland. That was a gate to eastern Prussia and Poland. The Belarusian operation coincided in time with the landing of British and American troops in Normandy. On June 6, 1944, the second front in Europe against Germany was opened at long last. The offensive in Belarusia was one of the biggest operations of the Second World War. More than 1.5 million troops, over 5,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, nearly 6,000 aircraft took part in fighting on the Soviet side. The operation was codenamed Bagration. The fronts were under the command of Generals Bagramyan, Chernyakhovsky, Zakharov, Rokossovsky. The operations of the fronts were coordinated by Marshal Zhukov and Vasilevsky. Operation Bagration started on June 23rd. It covered a vast territory of up to 1,000 kilometers in width and 600 in depth. It took only 10 days to wipe out 67 enemy divisions. A gigantic 400-kilometer gap was made in the center of the German front. The Soviet army liberated Minsk, the capital of Belarusia. The front was receding westward, and life in the liberated areas was gradually returning to normal. It was yet a difficult life. The pain of losses left scars in the hearts of people. The whole country was engaged in an effort to rehabilitate the war-ravaged areas. The siege of Leningrad was ended. It seemed that not only people, but even paintings and marble were breathing the air of freedom. But the rigors and concerns of war still permeated every hour of the peaceful effort. In the northwest, the German troops were pressed to the Baltic shores. In the autumn of 1944, their defeat became inevitable. On October 13th, the Soviet troops entered Riga, and again a frontline cameraman filled these unforgettable moments.